If I had said yes, maybe my whole life would have been different. But I kept quiet. And he left. My name is Minerva Eloise Jackson. I'm 84 years old. I live alone in Memphis, Tennessee, in a house that was once noisier, and now only echoes with the footsteps of memory. My hair no longer holds the volume it once did, but it still bears the pattern of someone who has faced wind, bombs, and absence. I live surrounded by plants, old books, and a fern that for some reason has never stopped blooming. I was a nurse. I served during the Vietnam War. I volunteered when I was just over 20. I said it was a calling, but deep down, it was an escape. An escape from a small town, from small expectations, from an arranged engagement, and from a life that was never mine. I landed straight in a makeshift hospital in the middle of the jungle. Dust, sweat, blood. It was a war so hot that fear evaporated before a tear fell. We learned to stitch bodies together, but no one taught us how to mend hearts. And it was there, right in the middle of the horror, that I found someone who didn't scream. He whispered. He read poetry as he bled. And between dressing changes, he called me in a way no one had ever called me before. Mrs. Moonlight. He proposed without kneeling, without an audience, without any promise of a future. Just with his eyes, and with the exhausted soul of someone who knew he could die the next morning. And me, I said. Nothing. This is this grandmother's true story, a moving love story that never came to fruition, but that shaped everything that came after. A love lost in the war, not by gunfire, but by silence. A love forbidden not by laws, but by fears no one saw. An untold love story of war, because no one would have believed it, because even I didn't believe it sometimes. But it existed, and now it needs to be told. If you've ever harbored a feeling no one knew, if you've ever been afraid to love at the wrong time, then this story is yours too. Comment below. Would you have said yes? Would you have walked away? I want to know, because maybe for the first time, I'm not alone in this memory. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe. Hear the stories that war almost erased. Find a voice. I can still feel the chill of that empty perfume bottle in my hands. It's shaped like a worn hourglass, and inside it for all these years, I've kept the ring he gave me. A simple ring made of time-darkened silver that looked more like a child's gift than a fiancé's. But it wasn't because of its value. It was because of its meaning. And every time I ran my finger over that thin band, I relived the same scene. The exact moment he looked into my eyes and said, "Wait for me." At that moment, the world was silent. The bombs had stopped, the hospital was silent, and time seemed to have held its breath along with me. My hands were stained with ether, my hair tied in a loose bun, he with a poorly stitched cut on his shoulder and his face white with fear, seemed more boy than man. But when he spoke, his voice was firm, firmer than my will to respond. And I didn't say yes. And I didn't say no either. I just lowered my eyes, as if silence were safer than any promise. It's curious how a yes or a no can change the course of an entire life. But sometimes, what really changes is what we fail to say. My silence was all he heard, and it was enough for him to understand. I convinced myself for a long time that it was prudence, that it was wise not to harbor illusions in a war that devoured men whole before breakfast. But deep down, maybe it was just fear. Fear of loving in the wrong place. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of giving something I didn't know if I would get back. That was the first time I felt the weight of what's unsaid. And it was also when I realized that forbidden love, the most forbidden of all, is the one we don't let blossom, not for lack of feeling, but for excess control. And that's how this grandmother's true story began. A love lost in war, not because it was ripped away, but because I myself let it slip away. And believe me, there are pains that don't bleed, but stay there, throbbing softly, like a memory. It was in that hospital with its cracked floor and the smell of chloroform that it all began. And that's where my memory drags me, every time I close my eyes. It was Vietnam, 1969, and the heat there wasn't just from the sun. It was from the crushed soul. We learned to recognize the end even before the tests. I swear, there was something in the air. The floor was dusty, the stretchers creaked, and the walls, if you can even call them walls, sweated. But nothing left as strong a mark as the smell of chloroform. It clung to our skin, our hair, our memories. To this day, when I open certain drawers here at home, it seems like the smell returns, reminding me that survival also leaves a scar. The hospital was makeshift, but there was a certain quiet dignity among the nurses. We made do with torn sheets, reused syringes, and firm words, because sometimes it was just the tone of our voices that kept someone from giving up. It was there, amidst the piled-up wounded and muffled prayers, that I saw him for the first time. A soldier with his shoulders hunched, his gaze unhurried, and a book hidden under his uniform. That intrigued me. Who carries poetry in the midst of hell? The scene seemed out of place. While others begged for painkillers, he murmured snippets, whispered words that weren't orders or shouts. They were verses. And even before we knew his name, we knew he wasn't like the others. There was a kind of weariness about him that wasn't physical, a wound that didn't bleed. Some colleagues called it a deviation, a weakness. I only saw a man trying to hold on to what beauty remained within him. Between dressing changes, I saw him take the book out of his pocket and run his fingers over the pages as if asking permission. He didn't say anything to me that day. He only looked up when he noticed me watching. And in an almost childish gesture, he hid the book as if it were a sin. It wasn't fear. It was shame. As if dreaming there were a crime. And perhaps it was, because in that place, hope was contraband. It was in this contrast, between the royal blood and the beautiful words, that my heart began to flutter. I didn't yet know what kind of bond was forming. I only knew it was different. War had a habit of stealing everything except our gazes. And his. It didn't leave me alone for long. Some men screamed, others wept silently. But he recited. The bullet had passed through his left arm and superficially pierced the side of his chest. It hurt. I know it hurt. I could see the way he bit his mouth to keep from trembling. But between one needle and the next, he asked me to get him a piece of paper and a pen. "There's something I need to write down before it disappears," he murmured, his voice choked with pain and urgency. And there, with his skin cold and his fingers slipping with blood, he wrote poetry, the paper folded in his hand like a secret. I should have let it go, but I kept it. After he passed out, numb from morphine and exhaustion, I took the crumpled paper and hid it inside the lining of my canvas bag. To this day, it's still there. The words are almost gone, faded by time and guilt, because I never knew if it was meant for me or for someone else. Maybe a woman waiting for him in some small town, with a veil on her head and faith in her heart. I remember a verse about eyes that turn on lights even when everything else is gone. That made me shiver, because he'd said something similar days before, when he called me Mrs. Moonlight. Was it coincidence? Was it irony? Was it affection? The truth is, in that war, no one said what they felt outright, so we lived between the lines. and his between the lines. They went through me like an unsigned note. That was the first time I felt like we were speaking the same language, even without exchanging words. He looked at me in a way that asked for nothing, but gave everything. And I pretended not to notice, because loving in that war was like trying to plant a flower in cement. We knew it wouldn't sprout, but sometimes we planted it anyway. And that, perhaps, is the essence of every forbidden love story. Knowing it will hurt, and still wanting it. It was in that instant, amidst blood and poetry, that I realized what was being born there wasn't just a bond. It was a moving love story, one that asked for no permission, no name, no set time. It just wanted to exist, even if only for a borrowed moment. At first, I thought it was a fever. It was common. The humidity and tension turned any body into a battlefield. But his hands trembled even after the morphine, even in the silence. There was a nervousness that didn't match the injury. It was as if something inside him was in a constant state of alert, even when his body had already passed out. It was only when I changed the sheet and saw the paper lying on the floor, crumpled and sweaty, that I understood. This wasn't illness. It was terror. It was a summons, official, hard, cold, stamped letters. He had been summoned twice, and the third time, he fled. He was there, among us, hidden from his own people. A deserter. A man who had chosen to disobey, not out of cowardice, but because some part of him could no longer bear to kill. I kept it like someone keeping a secret from another life. And I looked at him with a mixture of compassion, fear, and admiration. You needed courage to run. Courage and desperation. In that moment, I understood he was shaking not from pain, but from guilt. Not the guilt of hurting, but the guilt of not being able to hurt anyone anymore. The war had swallowed everything he was, except the ability to feel. And feeling, here, was dangerous. Most of the soldiers I treated were already broken. But he was trying to put the pieces back together while he was still bleeding, and that disarmed me. From that moment on, I began to see him differently. No longer as a patient, but as someone who was part of my own internal rupture. I, a nurse in white uniform, trying to save bodies. He, a nameless soldier trying to save his soul. It was the dance of the impossible. But somehow, we danced. And this dance, even without touching, was the beginning of what would become the untold love story of war. And I started to wonder who else in that hospital had secrets hidden among the bandages. Because sometimes, what hurts isn't in the body. It's in the choices we made to stay alive. It took weeks for it to sink in. The routine was so demanding that names became numbers and faces blurred into shadows. But one day I had to fill out an evacuation report. I looked for his file. And nothing. No record with that name. When I brought the matter to the lieutenant, he frowned and said, "That soldier should already be at another base." The confusion turned to alarm. They sifted through the papers, turned over lists, until it became clear. The name he'd given me wasn't his. He laughed nervously, like someone who knows the truth has teeth. He said he had his reasons, but didn't explain. "It was safer this way," he said, as if I would understand. And maybe I understood. Too much. Because war did that. It turned people into ghosts. Some by obligation, others by choice. And he chose to disappear, even though he was right there, right before my eyes. From that moment on, the way others looked at me changed. They began to watch me as an accomplice, but I knew nothing. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I began to be questioned. "Did you know? Did you sleep with him? Is he hiding someone from the enemy or from his own troops?" The questions came sharply, full of venom. And all I had was a strange certainty in my chest. He wasn't dangerous. He was just a man trying to exist in a different way. But that, in that context, was almost a crime. The trust between us, previously silent, became an invisible pact. It wasn't soap opera love. It was shared survival. And that unites us more than any vow at the altar. Even without a real name, he was present in a whole way. And maybe that's why it hurt so much. Because I knew that bond had no place to exist. It couldn't be named, nor acknowledged, nor protected. It was a story of forbidden love, the kind that grows between urgency and risk. And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't hold him. Not without compromising everything I'd sworn to protect as a nurse, as a woman, as someone who still believed that saving was more important than punishing. That night I sat alone behind the nurse's station and wrote on the back of a draft, "How do you love someone who lies for a living?" I tucked the paper away in the same bag as the poem, and I went to sleep without an answer. It was always at night that he appeared. The quietest shift, when the wind carried the scent of burning rice fields, and the shadows stretched like sad memories across the hospital floor. He never asked for anything. He would just walk slowly to the end of the corridor and sit beside me, near the lamp I insisted on leaving lit, even when everyone told me it was a waste of oil. "You have light in your eyes," he would murmur, with a tired half-smile. And ever since, he called me Mrs. Moonlight. At first, I thought it was a joke, a way to tease me. But there was something in his voice, a tenderness disguised as irony, that left me speechless. No one had ever called me that. And in that war, where everything was gray, receiving a nickname made of glitter disconcerted me. Not that I responded. I kept calling him you, as if that maintained a safe distance. But inside, something broke every time he said my name, with that nickname between the words. The lamp became our meeting place. I spent the night waiting for the soft sound of his footsteps. Sometimes he'd come in with a bandage that needed changing. Other times, just to tell me a passage from a book or show me a new button, he'd ripped off his uniform. "For luck," he'd say. We began to exchange long silences, the kind that say more than conversation. And even though I knew it was fragile, fleeting, maybe even wrong, I let it be. Because the truth is, our hearts don't know what's right in war. Being called Mrs. Moonlight was like being seen in a way no one had ever seen me. Not before, not since. And that leaves a mark. Even if you pretend it wasn't, even if you spend your life telling yourself it was just affection, just imagination, just an isolated gesture amidst the chaos. But it wasn't. It was love. The kind you don't shout about, don't acknowledge, keep quiet for survival. But it still exists, and stays. And then, one of those nights, I almost said I'd wait for him. Almost. But instead I just tightened the wick on the lamp and hoped the smell of burning oil wasn't the only thing he remembered about me. That afternoon the sky seemed different. Lower, denser, as if the air knew something we didn't. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach even before the sirens wailed. The hospital was already busier than usual, and I hadn't even removed the glove from the last suture when the ground shook. An explosion near the cafeteria rattled the windows, and chaos descended like an avalanche. Screams, smoke, falling gurneys, bodies pushed against the walls. Everything turned to dust. I ran toward the shelter, stumbling over pieces of the world that no longer had form. And there, in the doorway, he stood, helmetless, covered in soot, his eyes wider than ever. We stared at each other for a second that seemed to last a lifetime. The dust between us hung like a veil, as if even the air knew this moment was rare. He held out his hand, and I, without thinking, went. As if in that instant, nothing else mattered but the touch. We stood close, so close I could smell the sweat, the gunpowder, the urgency. He brought his hand to my face, smearing ash and hope on my cheek. And then he leaned in, slowly, his eyes closing as if he knew he wouldn't get another chance. And I turned my face away, not out of contempt, nor out of fear of him, but out of fear for myself. Because if that kiss happened, there would be no going back. And there, amidst explosions and vows never spoken, I chose silence again. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The way his fingers slipped from my face said it all. Frustration, pain, acceptance, and a goodbye that hadn't happened yet, but was already certain. I felt the weight of that non-kiss for years. Because, you see, some things hurt more for not having happened. And that denied kiss became a shadow over me. A shadow that haunted my days, even after the war ended. To this day, when I hear thunder or see dust in the air, I remember that shelter. That almost. That love lost in the war, which never blossomed but took root in my heart. Thompson was one of those women you hear before you see her. She had a firm voice, the look of someone who had seen the worst, and survived. A head field nurse. She knew like no one else when a soul was about to depart, even if the body still breathed. She never asked me anything directly, but she sensed everything. She saw the way I watched that soldier. She saw the silence we exchanged like those sharing prayer. One day, as we washed our hands in the makeshift gallon, she blurted out, "They're leaving, Minerva, and we're left with what's left." I remained silent, as always, but her words clung to my skin like dried blood. She didn't say it with contempt. She said it with sadness. It wasn't a warning. It was a warning from someone who had already left. I kept this for days, and the more time passed, the more I felt she knew. She knew about the hidden poem, the constant gaze, the lamp lit even for no reason. Thompson didn't judge, but she also couldn't help but remember that war took a heavy toll on any spark of tenderness. It was a sultry morning that she died. A sudden attack hit one of the side wings, and she was hit by debris. When we found her, she was covered in soot and silence. He didn't have time to say goodbye, and I buried more than just her body. I also buried the last shred of courage I had left to say anything, because after her death the hospital became colder, and I tougher, as if that strong woman had taken with her my right to feel. I never spoke to anyone about him again, not about what I felt, not about what we had, even though we hadn't. Thompson was the only one who would have understood, the only one who wouldn't have asked for explanations. And when she left, I felt like I'd lost my witness, the only one who knew that love existed, even though it had never been admitted. And it's strange to think about it now, because every moving love story needs someone who knows it happened, someone who confirms it wasn't just imagination. Maybe that's why I'm here now, telling you everything. Because keeping a secret is like carrying cracked glass. Sooner or later, it cuts. And mine has bled for far too long. He handed me the box as if he were handing me something that couldn't be returned. It was small, made of raw wood, with no lock, no apparent secret. But what was inside was his most intimate possession. A worn uniform button, a handwritten poem on folded paper, and a photograph, torn in half, the other half missing. "This is all I am," he said, with a calmness that chilled me to the core. He asked me to keep it until the end of the war, but, you see, I've kept it to this day. The button, they say, was from his original uniform, the one he fled. It was his last connection to the name he left behind. The poem apparently was unpublished. It didn't have elaborate rhymes, but it had truth. One of those truths that burn. As for the photo, I never knew who the other half was. A woman, a brother. He tore it up before giving it to me, and never explained, as if to say, that part doesn't matter anymore. Or maybe he was saying, I don't want you to know too much. And I accepted, because in war, we learn not to ask, when silence weighs more heavily than the answer. I kept the box inside my medicine cabinet, among the bandages and IV bottles. It was my secret reliquary. Sometimes in the middle of the night I'd open it just to make sure it was still there. As if touching those objects reminded me that it had all been real, because the outside world said it was imagination, that there was no room for feelings in times of death. But I knew, and so did he. Our bond fit in that box, and even though it was small, it was all we had. The curious thing is that, over the years, the box changed location, but never its importance. It went from the closet to the sock drawer, then to the back of the kitchen cabinet, and now it's here, inside a china cabinet that no one in the family dares open, because every untold love story from the war needs a symbol, and that box is mine. Sometimes I think that if someone finds it after I'm gone, they won't understand. They'll think it was just a sentimental old woman's doing. But maybe, just maybe, someone will realize that inside lives a piece of a man who couldn't be remembered, but who was loved nonetheless. He returned without warning, like a wind changing direction, in the middle of the night. I was rearranging a shelf of syringes when I heard the door creak. I turned my head slowly, expecting nothing, and there he was. But he wasn't the same. His uniform was gone. His shoulders, once tense, now slumped like wet twigs. His beard covered half his face, and his eyes... oh, his eyes no longer held the sparkle of poems. They were just tired. Not physical tiredness. We treated that. It was a different kind, deeper. A kind of exhaustion that only those who have seen their soul, ripped out, understand. He didn't say much. He just hugged me, tightly, with the strength of someone who knew it would be the last time. And in that hug lay a plea, a lament, and a goodbye that still had no name. The pressure of his arms made me understand what was coming. We didn't need words. We'd already said everything we hadn't said before. But even so, he wanted to speak. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Minerva, marry me." Just like that. Straight, raw, true. And I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the others could hear it. My hands sweated, my legs weakened. For a second I wondered, what if? What if I said yes? What if we ran away, turned over new leaves, tried even though we knew the world wasn't for us? But fear? Oh, fear spoke louder. Not his fear, but mine. Fear of what others would say. Fear of giving up the safe life I dreamed of after the war. Fear of loving someone who could disappear again. So, I didn't answer. I didn't say yes. Or no. I just stood there, silent, like the first time. And he understood. Because those who truly love understand silence. He squeezed my hand slowly, like someone sealing a pact that needs no words, an agreement between two broken hearts. And after that, he simply disappeared. I never heard from him again. No letter, no news, no rumor. Only the echo of that proposal hanging in the air. A nurse's love from World War II, even if it was in Vietnam. Because every love born in war carries the same wounds. And what remained was the absence of what could have been. Silence may seem light, but it weighs. It weighs on time. It weighs on memory. It weighs on the heart. When he proposed and I didn't respond, I thought I was buying time, that he would insist, that maybe he would come back the next day, laughing at my hesitation. But he didn't. Not that day, nor in the days to come. He understood what I didn't have the courage to say. And in a way, my silence rang louder than any other word. It sounded like a no, even though it wasn't. It was strange because there was no fighting. There was no crying, no fuss. Just an aching stillness, the kind that invades your body like a fever. The next day, I spent the shift searching for him, with my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe he was in another wing. Another part. I already knew. When I discreetly asked the base doctor, he looked away. He must have been transferred, he said lamely. But I already knew that kind of disappearance. He was the kind of guy who leaves no trace. In the days that followed, I worked like a machine. I repeated the same movements, answered the same questions, but inside, there was only emptiness. I began to dream of him, always in the same scene, reaching out, expecting something I couldn't give. I woke up sweating, my heart racing, and for the first time since arriving at war, I wanted to leave, because to stay was to be haunted by everything that never happened. For 54 years I carried that moment like a thorn under my skin. Sometimes I forgot, sometimes it throbbed, but it never left. It was its absence that stayed with me, more than any concrete memory. Because every moving love story has that kind of chapter, the one written, not with ink, but with silence. And it was in that silence that I began to understand that it wasn't just him I missed. It was myself, the version of me that believed I deserved that love, and was too afraid to accept it. I never wore a veil. I never walked down a church arm in arm with anyone. But, curiously, I lived as if I had, because the marriage that never happened shaped every choice I made. After the war, I had suitors. One, a dentist who took me dancing on Thursdays. Another, a widower with 2 daughters who asked me for advice in the wee hours. She even proposed in 1982. But I always backed away, always stopped short of the altar, not out of pride, but because, deep down, I had already said yes to someone, even without words. People thought I was too demanding. She doesn't give in, they said. But they didn't know I already had. In that shelter, under the glare of the bombs, the moment I didn't accept the kiss, but desired it with all my heart. It's hard to explain this to anyone who's never experienced forbidden love. It seems crazy, but anyone who has ever carried an almost in their heart understands. What wasn't becomes the mold for everything that could have been. I built a good life after all. I worked in clinics, got promoted, helped train new nurses. I took short trips, grew plants, adopted a cat. But every now and then that feeling would come. No one had ever touched my arm like he did. No one looked at me like that, as if I were the last lit window in a world in ruins. And that changes us inside. Even when someone came close, I'd recoil. Not out of disinterest, but because no hug felt like that. No gesture could penetrate the layers I'd built around myself. And that's why I never married. Because deep down, I was already a widow of something that never came to be. An untold love story of war, which made me who I am, even though it never ended. And now, looking back, I see that that unaccepted request wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything I would come to understand about love, about fear, and about the silent way in which life demands answers that we thought we would never need to give. 2 years after the war ended, I received a letter. The envelope was plain, with no return address, no visible postmark. It arrived folded among bills and grocery flyers. I almost threw it away. But when I opened it, I recognized the handwriting immediately. That irregular handwriting, with the letters slanting slightly to the left. It was his. Or at least, it looked like his. There was no signature, just a short sentence, written in faded ink. You did what you could, and that was love. Simple as that. I held that paper for hours, unsure of what to do. I read and reread it, trying to grasp some clue, some reference. Anything that would tell me where he was, if he was still there. But there was nothing beyond those words. But that was all. Because seeing that written was like having a knot untied inside me. For the first time I felt as if he had forgiven me. Or perhaps understood me. That this silence that had driven him away had also been, somehow, love. I never told anyone about this letter. I kept it along with the uniform button and the old poem. Because every forbidden love story needs relics. And this letter became mine. Sometimes I still read it. When it's raining heavily or when I feel like I'm forgetting the details of his face. Reading it brings me a strange kind of comfort. As if he still sees me from somewhere. As if he knows I'm still waiting for an answer that never came in its entirety. Not knowing if the letter was actually from him gave me a kind of freedom. Because, in a way, I could interpret it however I wanted. I could believe it was, and that was enough. Because in the end, the most important things in life aren't always proven. And the love of a nurse in World War II, or any war, almost never leaves a trace. But it does leave its mark. And that mark, that crooked line, written on pale paper, was the closest we ever got to a reunion. And perhaps, for that very reason, it hurt and healed in equal measure. I received the fern in 1970 from a neighbor who moved away soon after. It was small, fragile, with its leaves curled up as if it were afraid of the world. I planted it in a clay pot and placed it on the windowsill, right where the morning sun hit. I never imagined it would last so long. They say ferns only live a few years, especially in dry places. But this one endured. And the more time passed, the more I realized there was something about it that wasn't just a plant. It grew over the years. There were times when it nearly died, when I forgot to water it or when the nights were too cold. But it always came back, strong, green, as if inside it held a desire that wasn't mine. Sometimes I watch the way it leans toward the light, as if searching for something it lost, or someone. And it's impossible not to think of it. The way it looked at me, the way it called me, Mrs. Moonlight. I began to think that plant was a kind of message, as if the yes I never said had transformed into a root, as if that plant life was there to remind me that love doesn't disappear. It transforms, sometimes into memory, sometimes into longing, sometimes into a leaf. Every time the fern blooms, something inside me blooms too. A memory, a fragment, a whisper that hasn't aged. I've thought about getting rid of it, donating it, replanting it somewhere else. But I never did. It's like it was the last bridge between me and him, between the version of me that almost said yes, and the one that still wonders what would have been like. Some people keep clothes, letters, pictures. I kept a plant, and somehow it kept me. Today she lives on the same windowsill, near the same window, receiving the same golden light that once crossed my face when he said, "Wait for me." And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel like she understands. If I had another chance, I would say yes. Not with the same firmness as before, perhaps. Not with the certainty young people think they have. But I would say it, even with a trembling voice, even with my heart still apprehensive. Because now I know, fear is also a choice. And sometimes it's crueler than war itself. War takes from you what you can't control. Fear takes what you held in your hands. And I let it slip away. Not for lack of love, but because I didn't know how to love amidst the chaos. Today, at 84, alone in this silent house, I think about how different things would have been. Maybe we would have fought. Maybe he would have disappeared just the same. But I would have tried. I would have allowed myself to feel, even if only for a short time. I would have made love a trench, too. One where we protect ourselves instead of running away. I would have told someone. I would have written a letter back. I would have held that hand for just one more minute. Life is made of these small acts of courage. The courage to stay, to say yes, to kiss in the midst of the bombardment. I didn't have that courage. I had others. I faced pain, death, endless goodbyes. But the courage to surrender, that was missing. And that's why I'm telling this story now. Because some things grow old with us, and others only grow when we stop hiding them. Perhaps you, listening to me now, have a love hidden away, too. An untold story, a gesture left half done, a look left lingering in the air. You don't need to chase after it, or rehash the past. But acknowledge it. Name it. Even if it's just for yourself. Because, you see, this is this grandmother's true story. A love lost in war, yes, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. And if this video is my way of responding, even if it's too late, then let it be recorded. Like a yes, whispered through time. A yes that doesn't change the past, but transforms everything within. If there's one thing I've learned after so many years, it's that what we keep silent also grows with us. Silence may seem easier at first, but it grows. It spreads. And one day, without warning, it becomes the very thing you most wish you'd said. I'm not the only one, I know. There are people out there, on the other side of the screen, with a letter they never sent, a kiss that almost ended, a request that went unanswered. And I'm not here to say I regret it. I'm here to say I've learned that love isn't the absence of fear. It's the courage to feel it even when faced with it, because life doesn't wait for us to prepare. It passes by and takes with it the what-ifs we let slip by. Now I ask you, what about you? Have you ever let a love slip away out of fear? Have you ever harbored a feeling no one ever knew? Tell me in the comments. I want to read every story, because maybe, just maybe, my pain will resonate with yours. And if this story stirred any memories of yours, then don't leave in silence. Click the subscribe button, activate the bell, because here, on this channel, the stories no one dared tell. Find someone to listen. The memories war tried to silence. Find a voice. And sometimes, all a heart needs to keep going is knowing it's not alone.